Good morning. Welcome to our Maundy Thursday reflection for this Holy Week. It's entitled Included, and we begin with our reading from John chapter 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from the Father and was going back to the Father, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus said to him, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." When he had washed their feet, and put on his outer garments, and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." When he had gone out, that is Judas, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him to himself, and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I have said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am coming, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. For by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Peter had just got back from the cathedral. It had been a magnificent occasion, as the celebration of Maundy Thursday communion always was. The bishop had been on top form. The washing of people's feet on the altar steps prior to the sharing of the Eucharist, an innovation which the bishop had introduced the previous year, was deeply moving. Seeing the bishop, with his robes tucked up under him, gently washing the feet of old and young alike, was one of the most meaningful things Peter had ever seen. The choir filled the great cathedral with magnificent music, and the singing of the congregation was equally glorious. But amidst all of this, Peter's involvement in the celebration of the communion was undoubtedly the high point. For as a young priest, to stand with your bishop and other senior priests and do the Lord's bidding and facilitate the sharing of the sacrament, and to do so on the night of Maundy Thursday and in the cathedral and for all these people, well, it just didn't get any better. He was on a high all the way home. This Maundy Thursday communion in this Holy Week had been the best ever. Peter had just got back from the cathedral when the phone rang. "Brother," he whispered, irritated that he wasn't going to have the chance to sit down and bask in the afterglow of the cathedral celebration. "Hello? St. Bartholomew's? Father Peter speaking. Can I help you?" A frail, distressed voice replied, "Father, I'm so glad you're there. It's John. He's got worse. I think he's going. Can you come round? He's still conscious, and he'd like to see you. He'd have been there in the cathedral tonight if he'd been well enough, it being Maundy Thursday and all, but that wasn't to be. So can you bring us the Eucharist, today being today? John would like that." Peter didn't have much to say. He knew Gillian Goodfellow's voice well, and he was familiar with her husband John's failing condition. Gillian's care and attention as a devoted wife of a dying husband was exemplary, and Peter did all he could to support her in very trying times. So within minutes he was at John Goodfellow's bedside, offering care and support to one of his favourite people. John was being comforted by Gillian, and Peter was also introduced to John's sister Edith, who had come to stay to provide another dimension of practical support. Eventually, when it was appropriate, it came time to share another and very different Maundy Thursday Eucharist. This humble bedroom was no cathedral, and yet Peter was aware of a holiness which was all-pervading. There was no bishop washing people's feet, and yet Peter was aware of a tenderness as Gillian held the bony hand of her frail old husband. There was no magnificent choir, and yet Peter was sure he could hear the sound of angel voices. There was no great congregation, and yet as Peter looked at Gillian and John and his sister, that was all the congregation that would ever be needed. When the bread and wine were to be shared, Peter served Gillian, and then placed a crumb of the Eucharistic wafer in a corner of John's mouth, and dampened the old man's lips with the wine from the communion chalice. Having done so, he turned to serve John's sister, only to find that she had gone. Undeterred, Peter brought the Eucharist to a conclusion, gave John a blessing, left an old man to absorb the healing moments of another Maundy Thursday communion, and retired to the front room with Gillian. Will you stay for a small refreshment before you go home, Father Peter? Taking a seat by a roaring fire, Peter was reunited with John's sister, who was bustling around with crystal sherry glasses and a plate of shortbread. Once Peter and Gillian had been served with their small refreshment, and Edith had reappeared from the kitchen with a glass of orange juice, Peter remarked to Edith that he was sorry she had not been able to stay for the communion. There was an embarrassed silence. Edith's cheeks reddened. It was Gillian who spoke first. "It's not for the wanting or for the meaning," she offered quietly. "It's just that she can't. For she's not able to take anything with alcohol for this many long year, for the battle with the drink. And I wasn't sure about the communion wine either," Edith added, "so I thought it best not to risk it." To this day, Peter doesn't know why he did what he did next. He hoped Gillian wouldn't tell the bishop. Indeed, he's still not sure what came over him. But he reached down into his case, took out his prayer book, and placed it on the small coffee table in front of him. Then he gently leaned over to where Edith was, took the glass of orange juice out of her hands, and placed it on the table beside the prayer book. And taking a finger of shortbread, he laid it carefully beside the glass. Within moments, prayers were said, a Bible reading was offered, and crumbs of shortbread and sips of orange juice were shared by another congregation around another holy table. Peter, Edith, and Gillian sat in silence for a while, allowing the depth of the atmosphere in the room to embrace them all. Nothing much more needed to be said. After hugs of thanks, words of reassurance, and promises of future contact had been exchanged, Peter took his leave and headed home, giving thanks for each of the 3 communions he had shared on that Maundy Thursday, where everyone had been included. He was on a high all the way home from his cathedral. This Maundy Thursday communion in this Holy Week had been the best ever. Gracious God, thank you for what you were willing to go through for our sakes, everything you endured to redeem and restore the world. Thank you for facing sorrow to bring us joy, darkness to bring us light, suffering to bring us healing, death to bring us life. Help us to give a little back to you who gave so much for all. Amen.